Amina had always been a dreamer. Born into a modest family in the bustling city of Lagos, her parents had pinned all their hopes on her education. From a young age, her father often said, "Education is your key to unlock the future." And for a while, Amina believed it too. Welcome to Tales by Steph, a home of beautiful African stories. Amina excelled in her studies, earning a scholarship to one of Nigeria's most prestigious universities. But university life was not what she had imagined. While others walked into lecture halls adorned in designer outfits, she entered with a humble second-hand bag. The disparity between her reality and the glittering lifestyles she saw around her began to weigh heavily on her. Her roommates frequently hosted late-night parties, flaunting the latest iPhones and luxury handbags gifted to them by their wealthy boyfriends. Meanwhile, Amina struggled to make her monthly stipend stretch between meals and textbooks. Her struggles worsened when her closest friend, Ada, unexpectedly dropped out of school. Ada had met a wealthy businessman who promised her a life of luxury, and within weeks, she was posting pictures from exotic locations on social media. Amina watched enviously as her friend's life transformed from ordinary to extraordinary. One fateful evening, while studying late at the campus library, Amina's life took an unexpected turn. A sleek black Range Rover car pulled up beside her as she walked back to her dorm. The driver stepped out, a tall, charismatic man in his mid-30s, dressed in a suit that screamed affluence. He introduced himself as Tunde and offered her a ride. At first, Amina hesitated. She had been taught to avoid strangers, but something about Tunde's charm and the allure of the luxury car made her pause. Against her better judgment, she accepted the offer. The car ride was short, but it opened a door Amina hadn't known existed. Tunde spoke with confidence, weaving stories of his business ventures and global travels. For the first time, someone was treating her like she mattered, like she was special. By the time they arrived at her dorm, Tunde had given her his number and invited her to dinner. Amina clutched the small card in her hand as she climbed the stairs, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. That night, as she lay on her tiny bed staring at the ceiling, Amina wrestled with her thoughts. She could almost hear her father's voice reminding her of her purpose. Yet, the promise of an escape from her struggles, the chance to live the life she had always envied, was tempting. As dawn broke, Amina made a decision that would change the trajectory of her life forever. The next day, Amina couldn't concentrate in class. Tunde's words echoed in her mind, smooth and reassuring, like a melody she couldn't shake. She'd never met someone so confident, so sure of himself, and so rich. His tailored suit and Rolex watch were a stark contrast to her simple life. But what struck her the most was the way he looked at her, not as another struggling student, but as someone with potential. When the lecture ended, she pulled out the small card Tunde had given her. His name was embossed in bold letters, accompanied by a phone number. Her fingers trembled as she dialed. She had told herself it was just curiosity, nothing serious. Maybe he wanted to help her, she reasoned. Hello? His deep voice came through the line, sending a ripple of excitement through her. Hi, it's Amina. From last night, she said hesitantly, unsure of what she expected him to say. I'm glad you called, Tunde replied, his tone warm. Are you free tonight? There's a dinner party I'd like you to join me at. Amina's heart skipped a beat. A dinner party? She hesitated, glancing at the stack of notes waiting to be read. But the temptation was too strong. Yes, I'm free, she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. Later that evening, Tunde arrived in his Range Rover, dressed impeccably in a white shirt that glowed in the evening light. Amina, wearing her best dress, a plain navy blue gown, felt painfully out of place as she stepped into the car. But Tunde's reassuring smile melted her insecurities. The dinner was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Held at a luxury hotel in Victoria Island, the room was filled with well-dressed men and women, sipping champagne and discussing investments. Amina clung to Tunde's side, overwhelmed by the opulence. For a moment she forgot who she was, allowing herself to bask in the illusion of wealth and power. Tunda introduced her as his special guest, a title that made her chest swell with pride. As the night wore on, she found herself laughing at his jokes, enchanted by the way he commanded the room. By the time he dropped her off at her dorm, Amina was hooked. But as she lay in bed that night staring at the peeling ceiling, a pang of guilt settled in her stomach. She thought of her father's tired hands and her mother's hopeful eyes. Was this the life they had envisioned for her? Yet, as she replayed the evening in her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger, something better. The next day, Tunda texted her, "I want to see you again." And just like that, Amina began to drift further from her studies and closer to a world she barely understood. Amina's life began to change in ways she couldn't have anticipated. Tunde's invitations became more frequent: dinners at exclusive restaurants, shopping trips to high-end malls, and late-night drives through Lagos in his luxury cars. Each outing pulled her further into his world, a place where struggle and poverty were distant concepts. At first, Amina tried to juggle her studies with her new lifestyle. She would attend classes during the day and meet Tunde in the evenings, carefully crafting excuses for her roommates about her sudden absences. But as the weeks went on, her focus began to waver. She found herself daydreaming in lectures, her mind drifting to the last gift Tunda had bought her, a sleek designer handbag she couldn't have imagined owning in her wildest dreams. One Friday evening, Tunda took her to an upscale boutique on the island. The store gleamed with marble floors and glass displays showcasing items that cost more than her father's yearly income. Amina hesitated at the entrance, unsure if she belonged there, but Tunde's gentle nudge reassured her. "Pick whatever you want," he said casually, as though the price tags meant nothing to him. Her eyes widened. "Whatever I want?" he smiled. "Whatever makes you happy." Amina wandered through the store, her hands brushing against silk dresses and leather handbags. She stopped at a pair of red heels, their glossy surface catching the light. She had never owned anything so beautiful. "These are perfect," she whispered, almost afraid to touch them. "They're yours," Tunda said, signalling to the shop assistant. As the shoes were packed into a pristine box, Amina felt a surge of exhilaration. For the first time, she felt like she was living the life she had always envied, one of luxury, comfort, and freedom from the weight of poverty. But as they left the boutique, a nagging thought crept into her mind. This wasn't her money. This wasn't her world. She was living someone else's dream, and she didn't know how long it would last. That night, back in her dorm, Amina tried to study for an upcoming test, but the pages of her textbook blurred before her eyes. She thought of Tunda's laughter, the way he made her feel important, and the promises he hinted at, of trips abroad, a better life, and financial freedom. The life she had always dreamed of seemed within reach, but it came at a cost she was beginning to understand. As the days turned into weeks, Amina began skipping classes more frequently. Her lecturers noticed her absence, and her grades started to slip. Her once clear goal of graduating with honours and securing a good job seemed less appealing compared to the instant gratification of Tunda's lifestyle. One evening, as they sat on a balcony overlooking the Lagos skyline, Tunda turned to her with a serious expression. "You're wasting your time with school," he said bluntly. Amina blinked, startled. "What do you mean?" "You're smart, Amina. You don't need a degree to succeed. Look at me. I built my empire without one. Why struggle for years when you could live the life you deserve right now?" His words struck a chord deep within her. Wasn't this the life she deserved? The life she had always dreamed of? She thought of her parents, of the sacrifices they had made to get her here. But then she thought of herself, of the loneliness, the struggle, and the endless cycle of poverty she was desperate to escape. For the first time, Amina considered what had once seemed unthinkable: abandoning her studies. Amina's mind was in turmoil as she sat in the dimly lit library staring at her open notebook. The words on the page blurred into meaningless lines as her thoughts wandered to Tunde's proposition. He had planted a seed of doubt that was quickly growing roots. She thought of her family back home, the pride in her father's eyes when she was accepted into university, the joy her mother showed whenever she mentioned her academic achievements. They had sacrificed so much for her education. Yet, here she was, questioning if it was even worth it. Her roommates, oblivious to her internal struggle, carried on with their conversations about lectures and assignments. "Amina, you're so quiet these days," one of them remarked. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Amina lied, forcing a weak smile. That evening, as she walked back to her dorm, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Tunde. "Meet me at the usual spot tonight. I have a surprise for you." Her heart raced. The usual spot was an exclusive rooftop lounge in Victoria Island. Tunde always made her feel like royalty there, ushering her to private tables and ordering the finest dishes. The allure of his world was irresistible, yet her conscience whispered warnings she didn't want to hear. She told herself it was just one evening, one escape from the pressure of her studies and the weight of her family's expectations. So, she agreed. When Tunde's car pulled up outside her dorm, Amina was struck by how effortlessly confident he appeared. He greeted her with his signature charm, handing her a small velvet box as she got into the car. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Open it and see," he replied, his eyes twinkling. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet, its surface glittering under the streetlights. Amina's breath hitched. She had never owned anything so exquisite. "Tunde, this is too much," she stammered, unsure of how to respond. "Nothing is too much for you," he said smoothly. "You deserve the best, Amina. But you need to let go of the things holding you back." At the lounge, as they sipped cocktails and gazed at the city lights, Tunde brought up the subject again. "I've been thinking about you a lot," he began. "You're wasting your potential sitting in classrooms, struggling to make ends meet. With me, you could have everything you've ever wanted." Amina looked down at her drink, her mind racing. "But my education, I can't just leave. My parents. Your parents want you to be happy, don't they? Do you think they'd want you to suffer for years when you could have a good life now?" His words were like honey, sweet and persuasive. Amina felt herself teetering on the edge of a decision she couldn't undo. That night, as she returned to her dorm, the bracelet still sparkling on her wrist, Amina knew she was standing at a crossroads. On one side was the life she had always envisioned for herself, a life of hard work, sacrifice, and eventual success. On the other was the life Tunde offered, immediate comfort, luxury, and freedom from struggle. The question was, which path would she choose? Amina barely slept that night. The bracelet on her wrist felt heavier than it should, as though it carried the weight of the decision she was being forced to make. The sun rose on another day, but the light did nothing to clear the fog of uncertainty clouding her mind. Her classes were a blur. As her lecturer discussed complex economic theories, Amina's thoughts drifted to Tunde's words from the night before. "You're wasting your time with school. Why struggle when you could have everything now?" The idea seemed tempting, almost logical, but logic didn't erase the guilt. After class, she sat under the old mango tree near the faculty building, a spot she often visited when she needed to think. She pulled out her phone and stared at her parents' most recent messages. Her father had written, "We are so proud of you. Keep pushing, my daughter." Her mother had sent a picture of the akara she had made, followed by, "I can't wait to cook this for you when you come home." Amina's chest tightened. How could she even think of abandoning everything her parents had worked so hard for? But then she thought of Tunde, his confidence, his generosity, the way he made her feel like she belonged in a world she had only dreamed of. That evening she received another message from him. "Dinner at my place tonight. I have something important to discuss." This time she didn't hesitate. She dressed in the finest outfit she owned, a black dress Tunda had bought for her a week earlier. When his car arrived, she climbed in without a word, her mind made up to at least hear what he had to say. Tunda's home was nothing short of breathtaking. A sprawling mansion tucked away in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. It radiated wealth and power. Inside, the marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air. Over a candlelit dinner, Tunda leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Amina, I see so much potential in you," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But you're holding yourself back by clinging to a system that doesn't value you. Do you really think that degree will change your life?" Amina hesitated. "It's what I've worked for my whole life," she said, her voice shaky. "And what has it brought you? Struggle? Sacrifice? Let me take care of you, Amina. You don't need to suffer to prove your worth. With me, you can live the life you deserve." He reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm, reassuring. "I want you to leave all that behind and be with me. I'll make sure you never lack anything again." Her heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment she had been dreading and anticipating all at once. Tunde wasn't just offering her gifts and trips anymore, he was asking her to make a life-altering decision. That night, as she lay in the guest room of Tunde's mansion, staring at the ornate ceiling, Amina made her choice. The life she had known, the struggles, the lectures, the constant reminder of her family's sacrifices, felt like chains weighing her down. With Tunde, she saw freedom. The next morning, Amina didn't return to her dorm. Instead, she sent a short message to her roommate. "I won't be coming back for a while. Please pack my things." Her phone buzzed almost immediately with concerned replies, but she ignored them. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was in control. What she didn't know was that her decision to abandon her studies and follow Tunde would lead her down a path far more complicated than she could have imagined. The first few days after Amina made her decision were a blur of luxury and excitement. She didn't look back. Not even once. Tunde's mansion became her new home, and each morning she woke up to breakfast served in a golden setting, overlooking the pristine pool in the backyard. There were no worries about assignments or deadlines, no lectures to attend, just endless days filled with shopping, massages, and nights of glitzy parties. For the first time, Amina felt at peace, even though she knew deep down that something was missing. She pushed those thoughts aside, telling herself that she was free now, free to enjoy life without the burden of expectations. Tunde had a way of making her feel like she was the center of his world. He showered her with gifts, took her to exclusive events, and even arranged for her to meet some of his influential friends. Powerful people who operated in circles she had only seen in movies. She was no longer a faceless student in the crowd. She was Amina, the beautiful, sophisticated woman by Tunde's side, someone who commanded attention. But, as the weeks passed, the shine of her new life began to dull. Amina noticed the subtle changes in Tunde's behavior. He would grow distant at times, disappearing for hours on business trips without explanation. When he was around, his attention was often split, his mind occupied by phone calls and meetings. The luxury, the parties, the adoration, none of it filled the growing emptiness she felt. One evening, as they attended an extravagant gala at a five-star hotel, Amina found herself sitting alone at a table, nursing a glass of wine. She scanned the crowd, the music thumping in her ears, but the faces around her were strangers. Tunde had been pulled into a conversation with a group of wealthy businessmen, leaving her to her own devices. For the first time since she had left school, Amina began to question her choices. What had she really gained by following Tunde? The money, the fancy clothes, the parties? None of it felt real. None of it felt like it was hers. She glanced at her phone, half expecting a message from her parents. But there was nothing. They hadn't contacted her since her abrupt departure from the university. The guilt began to gnaw at her once more. Amina! A familiar voice broke her reverie. She looked up to find Tunda standing before her, his usual confident smile absent. He had a look of concern in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. "I've been looking for you," he said, sitting down beside her. "Is everything okay?" Amina stared at her glass, swirling the wine, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't know, Tunda," she said quietly. "I thought this life would make me happy, but it's not enough. I don't know who I am anymore." Tunda's expression softened, and he placed his hand on hers. "I thought you wanted this," he said gently. "You have everything now. What more could you need?" "I don't know," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought I wanted it too, but now I feel like I've lost myself." Tunda's face hardened slightly, a flicker of frustration crossing his features. "Amina, you're overthinking this. You have everything most people dream of. Don't let the small things ruin it for you." Amina pulled her hand away, her heart racing. "The small things? What do you mean by that?" Tonda hesitated, as if trying to gauge her reaction. "You've been distant lately, like you're searching for something else. But this is the life you wanted, remember? You made a choice." She stood up abruptly, the wineglass slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. The sudden noise startled them both, and a hush fell over the table. Tunda didn't seem fazed, but Amina's mind was in chaos. "I did make a choice," she said, her voice trembling. "But now I don't know if it was the right one. I've been so caught up in what I thought I wanted, in all the things you could give me, that I forgot what it means to be me. I forgot what really matters." Tunda's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "You're not making sense, Amina. You're here because you wanted more. I gave you more. If you can't appreciate that, then maybe this isn't working." Amina recoiled, feeling the weight of his words. She had known Tunda was powerful, had known his world was cutthroat, but hearing those words from him made her question everything. She had chosen to leave her studies, to walk away from her family's dreams, to accept a life of excess. And yet, now that she had it, she realized it wasn't enough. That night, as she lay in the guest room of his mansion, staring at the ceiling, Amina finally admitted the truth to herself. She had been running from her responsibilities, chasing a fleeting fantasy of freedom. But freedom didn't come in the form of luxury. It didn't come from depending on someone else. For the first time, Amina longed for something real. She longed for purpose. The days that followed the gala were a whirlwind of emotions. Tunda had become distant, almost cold after their confrontation. Amina noticed how he no longer showered her with the same attention, no longer made her feel like the center of his world. The late-night parties continued. The extravagant gifts kept coming, but something had shifted. She could feel it in the way he looked at her, as though she were a possession, a toy he no longer found interesting. Amina, on the other hand, felt suffocated by the life she had chosen. The mansion, the cars, the designer clothes, none of it filled the void inside her. The emptiness had grown like a chasm that no amount of wealth could bridge. She missed the feeling of accomplishment that came with studying, with pursuing something that was hers and hers alone. One afternoon, Amina stood by the window of her bedroom, watching as the world outside moved on without her. She had abandoned her studies, her friends, her family's dreams. She thought that by leaving all of that behind, she could escape the pressures of life. But now, in the silence of Tunde's mansion, she realized how much she had lost. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "Amina, we miss you. Come home, please. Your father is worried about you." Amina felt her heart clench in her chest. She had left without saying goodbye, without a second thought. Her parents had always supported her, always believed in her, and she had betrayed them. She hadn't even considered how they might feel about her sudden departure. Tunde entered the room, breaking her train of thought. He didn't speak at first, but the tension in the air was palpable. He had noticed the change in her, and it seemed like he had lost patience with the emotional distance that had grown between them. "Amina, what's going on with you?" he asked, his voice sharp. You've been distant for days. You wanted this life, remember? You're here because you chose it. I know, Amina said softly, turning to face him. But I've been thinking, maybe I made the wrong choice. Tunda raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. What do you mean? You're living a dream. You have everything you ever wanted. I thought I did, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But I've realized I'm not happy. I thought I could escape everything, my responsibilities, my future, the pressure to succeed. But now I just feel empty. I don't know who I am anymore, Tunde. I miss who I was before this, before I let myself be consumed by all of this. Tunde looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Amina thought he might understand, might offer her some comfort. But instead, he sighed and shook his head. You're being foolish, Amina. You think you can just go back to your old life, to school and all that nonsense. You're better than that. You've chosen this life, and there's no turning back now. His words stung. It was as though he had no understanding of the battle she was facing, the struggle between the woman she wanted to be and the woman she had become. She wanted to argue, to tell him that she wasn't just some trophy to be flaunted at parties, but something inside her held her back. She realized that even if she wanted to, she didn't have the strength to break away completely from him. Not yet. But Amina knew deep down that she couldn't stay like this forever. The emptiness would consume her if she didn't find a way back to herself. She needed to make a choice. Did she want to continue living in the bubble Tunde had created for her, or did she want to return to the world she had left behind? That night, Amina couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, grappling with the weight of her decision. It wasn't just about going back to school, it was about reclaiming her independence, her purpose. She needed to prove to herself that she was more than just the sum of the designer clothes and luxury cars she had accumulated. In the early hours of the morning, Amina made a decision. She would return. She didn't know how or when or if Tunde would allow her, but she had to try. She couldn't keep living in this gilded cage. The next day, as Tunde prepared to leave for one of his business meetings, Amina packed a small bag. She took the bracelet he had given her, the one she had worn so proudly, and placed it on the dresser. It was a symbol of the life she had tried to live, a life that had come with a price. When Tunde left, she quietly slipped out of the mansion and into the world she had abandoned. She didn't know what awaited her, but for the first time in a long while, Amina felt a sense of hope. She was taking control of her life again. Amina didn't have a clear plan when she left Tunde's mansion that morning, but as she walked through the streets of Lagos, she felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. She didn't know where she was going, but each step took her further away from the life she had left behind. Her phone was buzzing constantly, the messages from Tunde piling up, each one more urgent than the last. She ignored them all. At that moment, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was reclaiming her sense of self. She caught a bus back to the university, her heart pounding in her chest as the familiar landmarks of her old life began to appear. The dusty roads leading to her campus felt like a distant memory, one she had long since forgotten. But now, as she stepped off the bus and walked towards the university gates, she felt a surge of determination. She knew there would be consequences. Her sudden departure had caused ripples of concern among her friends, and her professors would surely question her absence. But none of that scared her as much as the thought of living in the bubble she had created with Tunde. That life wasn't hers. It never had been. As she entered the dormitory, her roommates stared at her in shock. "Amina, where have you been?" one of them asked, rushing to her side. "We thought something happened to you." "I'm sorry," Amina said, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have said something. I got lost in everything." Her roommate Nkechi frowned. "What do you mean? Where did you go?" "I was with someone," Amina whispered, her mind racing as she tried to find the right words. "Someone who offered me everything I thought I wanted. But I realized it wasn't enough. I've been living in a dream, Nkechi. I need to go back to school. I need to finish what I started. Nkechi gave her a long look, as if trying to process everything Amina had just said. Tunde? She asked, her tone incredulous. Amina nodded, her eyes downcast. I thought he could give me everything. Money, freedom, luxury. But it wasn't real. I wasn't happy. Nkechi sighed, pulling Amina into a tight hug. I'm glad you came back, she said softly. I was worried about you. Amina felt a mixture of guilt and relief as she hugged her friend back. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She had left behind everything she had worked for, and now she would have to rebuild the trust she had broken with her family and friends. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of purpose. The next few days were filled with apologies and explanations. Amina had to come clean to her professors about her absence, and though they were disappointed, they understood. She promised to catch up on her missed work, but the hardest conversation was yet to come, the one with her parents. She called them one evening, her hands trembling as she dialed the familiar number. When her mother answered, Amina could hear the worry in her voice. Amina, is everything okay? We've been trying to reach you. I'm sorry, Mama, Amina said, her voice breaking. I made a mistake. I left. I thought I could find happiness in a life that wasn't mine. But I realize now that I need to finish my studies. I need to come home and make things right. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before her mother finally spoke. We're just glad you're safe, Amina. We don't care about the mistake you made. All we care about is that you come home and finish what you started. Amina's eyes filled with tears as her mother's words sank in. She had feared they would be angry, that they would turn their backs on her. But instead, her mother's love and support washed over her like a balm. Over the next few weeks, Amina settled back into her routine at university. It wasn't easy. She had to fight to catch up with her classes, to prove to herself that she was capable of more than the life she had briefly glimpsed with Tunde. But each day brought her closer to the woman she wanted to be, someone who worked for her dreams, who didn't rely on the wealth and power of others to feel validated. The messages from Tunde eventually stopped. At first, she had hoped he might come after her, that he might realize the mistake of pushing her away. But as the days turned into weeks, she realized that his absence was a blessing. She didn't need his approval or his wealth. What she needed was her own sense of purpose, her own journey. One evening, as she walked across campus, Amina paused to watch the sunset. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, the same colours she had once seen in her dreams of a better life. But now she understood that the path to happiness wasn't paved with designer bags and fancy cars. It was paved with hard work, resilience, and the courage to face the consequences of her choices. Amina took a deep breath, her heart light. She had lost her way once, but now she was finding it again. Amina woke up to the sound of her alarm blaring, the sunlight streaming through the window and bathing her room in a soft golden hue. It was a new day, and for the first time in months she felt at peace. The weight of her past decisions, the ones that had caused so much turmoil, no longer felt like a burden. Instead, they had become lessons that had shaped her into someone stronger, someone wiser. She rolled out of bed, stretching her arms above her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. Her room was modest, filled with the few belongings she had left after her brief stint in Tunde's world. Her textbooks were neatly arranged on the desk, a symbol of the path she was now determined to follow. She had started studying again, dedicating herself to her courses, and even though the workload was overwhelming, she found herself enjoying the challenge. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a reminder that the world outside was still moving. It was a message from Nkechi. How's it going? You look like you found your groove again. Amina chuckled softly. She had found her groove, but it wasn't just in her studies. It was in the way she had finally learned to trust herself. She texted back. It's going well, slowly but surely. Thanks for being there for me. After a quick breakfast, she made her way to the university library. The campus was bustling with students, their laughter and chatter filling the air. It felt different now, more alive, more vibrant. Before, she had always been preoccupied with the idea of success, chasing after a future that had been dictated by others. Now she was beginning to understand that success came in many forms. It wasn't about wealth or status. It was about finding fulfillment in the small, meaningful moments. As she walked through the library doors, the familiar scent of books and quiet reverence enveloped her. Amina found a spot near the back, far from the distractions, and opened her laptop. She had a lot of catching up to do, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like an opportunity to reclaim her future, to prove to herself that she was capable of achieving something greater than the life she had once tried to escape. The semester was quickly drawing to a close, and although Amina still had much work to do, she was determined to finish strong. Her professors, though initially skeptical of her sudden return, were impressed by her dedication. She had once been a student who skipped classes, who lived for the weekends and the distractions that came with them. But now, she was someone who attended every lecture, who studied late into the night, and who, most importantly, believed in the power of her own potential. One evening, as she sat in her dorm room preparing for a final exam, her phone rang. She recognized the number immediately. It was her mother. "Amina, how are you? Your father and I are so proud of you. We've been following your progress through your professors, and we can see the difference in you. I knew you'd find your way back." Amina smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. Her mother's words meant more than she could ever express. "Thank you, Mama. I don't think I could have done this without your support." Her mother laughed softly on the other end of the line. "You've always been strong, Amina. Don't forget that. We love you, and we're here for you no matter what." As Amina hung up, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had lost herself once, but she had found her way back, and now she was ready to face whatever the future held. The following months flew by in a blur of exams, assignments, and projects. Amina found herself excelling, not just academically but also personally. She had learned to appreciate the quiet moments, the ones where she could sit alone in the library, reading a book that sparked her curiosity, or the ones where she could simply take a walk around campus, lost in her thoughts. But despite the progress she had made, there were still moments when she thought of Tunde, of the life she had left behind. Every now and then, she would receive a text or an email from him, but she had learned to ignore them. She couldn't go back to that world. She had walked away for a reason, and the thought of returning to that life felt suffocating. Still, there were times when she wondered if he ever thought of her, if he regretted the way things had ended. But then she remembered the words her mother had told her. "Don't look back. Keep moving forward." And so, she did. As the semester drew to a close, Amina stood at the edge of a new chapter in her life. Her final exams were over, and her grades reflected the hard work she had put in. She had passed every course with flying colours, a testament to her resilience and determination. The future was wide open, filled with possibilities. Amina knew she would face challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready. She was no longer the girl who had abandoned her dreams for the sake of someone else's vision of happiness. She was Amina, a young woman with her own path to walk, her own destiny to fulfill. The road ahead was hers to navigate, and she was no longer afraid. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment.